Hello, and welcome to Crime and Court. My name is Heather, and this is episode 9, the trial opening statements of the Wisconsin versus Zachariah Anderson case. We are going to watch portions of the opening statements from both the prosecution and the defense. There is a section in between where there's an objection and a long argument, and then we get some response and a day in between, and then we get to finally the rest of her her opening statement. But we'll get through it. I think it's interesting to watch the different arguments and what they're allowed to talk about and whatnot, especially now knowing that we know they filed this Denny motion to try to get Michael Campbell, evidence about Michael Campbell into this trial, and it was denied, unfortunately, by Judge Schroeder. So for this episode, we're going to watch the statements. We're going to watch all of that, the arguments in between the statements, and kind of knowing now that we know the first trial ended in a mistrial, kind of look at how the state's going about their opening statement this time. Because as we recall from whatever episode it was, I can't remember, sorry, I got my train of thought. So as we recall, the first trial was a mistrial because the prosecution started talking about how their key witness, Nerita Macias, had gone to the wrong building, and that was completely brand new news to the defense, and they had planned their entire trial around this key witness's original testimony, which she was now changing her testimony. So this is where we're at now. Then they filed the Denny motion, which was denied. First they filed to get Gravely off the case. That was denied. Then they tried to get this Denny evidence in over Michael Campbell, and that was denied. So now we're having a trial without information about another person who could have done the crime, who could have motive, means, opportunity. And we're going into a new trial. I believe it took another year, so they had to go back and strategize. So Zach had been sitting in prison already for about 3 years at this point. Almost. And he just wanted his day in court. So, speaking of his day in court, let's watch the opening statements. And before we dive in, can you please hit that like button? Also, don't forget to check if you're subscribed to make sure that you get notifications for this case and other cases like this. And please, if you wouldn't mind sharing this episode with a friend who might also be interested in this case. So we're going to begin with District Attorney Michael Gravely speaking, and here we go.
Judge, ladies and gentlemen of the panel, thank you, first of all, for all your service. Can everybody hear me very well? This will be several days. There'll be a lot of difficult and some emotional testimony, and I just wanted to thank you in advance for the time and effort and attention you're going to put in this case. This case has a lot of moving parts, and so though the judge has asked that it be brief in his discussion with you, I fear that I need to cover a number of things with you, so I'm going to take the time that I believe that the evidence demands to try to give you a roadmap as to what I believe you will hear in terms of evidence in this case. I start with what I understand Sadie Beecham will share with you. Sadie Beecham, I think, will tell you that on May 17th, 2020, she felt her life was finally about to change. She had with the defendant last in 2012. So this was 8 years later since she had last lived with him on a regular basis. They had 3 children together. She will tell you that he basically came and went as he pleased. He had a different household. He did not pay on any kind of regular basis. Sometimes he showed up on weekends, and yet he expected and anticipated that they were in a relationship and that simply was going to be enough. In December of 2018, she didn't want to live that way anymore. And so for a variety of reasons, they broke up.
By the way, I do have this on 1.5 speed. I watch everything on usually 2 2.0 speed. You know, I watch it on double speed, so on YouTube. So if this is too fast for you, please feel free to slow it down. You can do so by hitting the gear and choosing your playback speed. So we're going to do 1.5 because I feel like you can totally understand what they're saying, but it goes fast, and especially in trial, it helps move it along. I also turned down the quality because it keeps skipping, and sorry about that. I don't know why I keep getting this black screen.
So that relationship, that separate houses, you come when you want. When you mess up, you just beg me for forgiveness or do a gesture that tries to get the same situation where you're always in control was going to be over. And so for a few weeks, they didn't have any contact. And then
watch Zach's reactions to testimony throughout the trial, through things that the prosecution says. Watch his reaction because he is very telling in what he thinks of what's being said. You can tell, like, a lot of times he'll shake his head and be like, no, that's not it. Or he'll make a face like, huh? Like, what? Where's this coming from? This is the first time hearing of it. So, yeah, just be mindful of his face.
Slowly but surely, the defendant wanted to have visits with his kids, which of course was fine with her, and he was able to get back in touch with her on a regular
By that face, I think it wasn't fine with her.
basis, trying to get back together with her, again trying the cycle of trying to get forgiveness and everything will change. But this time she wasn't going there. Doesn't mean she wasn't nice to him, doesn't mean there weren't times where she tried out of kindness to explain.
I think maybe he's misrepresenting the situation with Sadie, and my episode for Sadie is Shady Sadie, so if I accidentally call her Shady, whoops.
Why this relationship was not happening doesn't mean she didn't have feelings for him in some way, shape, or form based on their history, but she was ready to move on. And by February 17th of 2020, she was on a dating site, and she met somebody where she thought maybe this will go somewhere. The person she was in contact
Whoops. Okay, there we go.
with was
In case
Rosalio
anybody wants
Gutierrez.
captions.
Now he was from Kenosha, so there was a drive to sort of see what she was going to be able to make of this. But he seemed to love his kids and to have a relationship with his kids, and she liked that it might go somewhere. Now this is the early weeks of this maybe relationship, right? It's not exclusive, and so she doesn't feel like she wants to share that yet with her 11-year-old who turns 12, and she certainly doesn't want to share it with the defendant, who is her ex. She knows him, and is right in the sense that what I'm going to talk about next in the evidence, I'm going to ask you to look for a certain pattern. I'm going to ask you to consider whether the defendant, as I outline the next grouping of incidents, is an individual who shows by each of these incidents that he is overwhelmed with jealousy. You'll hear a number of communications where that is clear even from his own mouth. And that he has an overwhelming need in that jealousy to be in absolute control when it comes to Satan. Each of these incidences can be characterized as a gesture where he demands control, and as he loses control, we'll talk about what the evidence shows comes next. More and more irrational each time, more and more disturbing. And then I'm going to ask you to take a look at whether the defendant in each of these incidences shows you his determination to have absolute control by using every tool available. Using human spies, a person named Steve Lentz, he texts as a lookout for him. Age 11 and 12 will tell you I was recruited by him as essentially a spy. And that he's willing to use electronics too. Basically every way you can spy on another individual, the defendant was employing in regards to Sadie Beecham. So let's talk about each of those incidences briefly. April 24th, and this is just a 1-month period where the defendant slowly but surely learns no
Oh my God, why does it keep doing this? I
so
have
what
it on
culminates at
its...
the end of that about a month-long period is Rosalio Gutierrez no longer being alive to anybody who cares about him, to anybody who knows him. So I start with April 24th. The defendant has his 3 children with Sadie at his house.
See if
So he has his 11-year-old daughter,
Oh,
whose
that's
birthday is
so
going to be the next day,
terrible.
and his 2 4-year-old twins at his home. He is the only adult there.
I can't.
Sadie does not have the kids on that day. So what Sadie does is invites her new
That's too
relationship,
blurry.
Rosalio, to come over to her home. She has no children there. She's a consenting adult whose children are at their father's. She invites Rosalio to her home. In the middle of the night, she's awoken. She's awoken because her doorbell rings. She looks out and she sees a vehicle that looks like a vehicle that the defendant owns squealing away. The next day, Rosalio and her discover that Rosalio...
That's very vague, though. You know, to just say, oh, it's just some dark vehicle that's my ex's. Like, he just drives either a black minivan or a black Audi. So, either way, you know, a dark car could look very similar to Zach's in the dark, especially.
Truck has been entered. A letter has been taken from that truck, as well as his car registration, a registration that has his stepfather's name signed on it as the person who signed, I believe, the title, the registration. That's missing from Rosalio's truck.
Stop it.
The 11-year-old daughter, then, by the time police talk to her, she is 12, says that in the middle of the night, she went with her father to the home of her mother, who she normally lives with, Sadie, that her father peeks in the windows at that location. The daughter says the two twins, age 4, are left at his house unsupervised. She actually says, I didn't feel that was safe. She says her father, the defendant...
There's been conflicting statements about this, that he did or didn't bring the younger twin boys with him on this this outing in the evening where the kids should have been in bed. And he admits it, I believe, to the police that he did go to Sadie's to look through the window to show the daughter that she was dating someone else. So, unfortunately, he did tell that, but which adds to their, you know, stalking charges, because if he did something like that, then he must be a stalker and he must be a jealous ex.
Gets the paperwork out of this person's truck. She says her father, the defendant, takes a listening device.
He just shook his head no. He said he didn't get it out of the truck. This is what it looks like to me.
And puts it in a vent at her mother's home. She says that he summons her over, and she is encouraged to look inside the window of her mother's home. And at that time, she sees her mother and a person she's never met, she hasn't seen before, who she now believes to be Rosalio, in that, I believe, living room.
That's shady Sadie. And then next to her is Rosalio's stepfather. And then next to him is his mother, if they pan out.
Of her house through the window. Her father's instructions are, be sure you don't steam the window up, because they might be able to see it. This is the middle of the night for an 11-year-old girl the day before her birthday, when a rational mind might be making sure everybody had a really good night's sleep, anticipating a party or a celebration the next day. This is how the defendant chooses to conduct himself. He admits to law enforcement that he had a premonition that something was going on over there, and not only does he admit he went there, but he admits that he encouraged or helped his daughter look in that window. He denies that he put a listening device in. He denies he left the 4-year-old twins behind. He says he brought them along in the middle of the night. Rang the doorbell, needing to show in a gesture, I'm still in control. You'll hear that in the defendant's phone, when law enforcement apprehend him, in his phone, they find a screenshot that has a section of the registration of Rosalio Gutierrez on it. It has the signature section for the person who is Rosalio Gutierrez's stepfather. And in handwriting, which the daughter will tell you is my father's handwriting, it has Rosalio Gutierrez's home Kenosha address written down. Now, the event I've told you about on April 24th occurs at Sadie's home. The defendant, of course, knows Sadie's home, right? He's been there in the context of the children, etc. This is new. This is information about Rosalio Gutierrez's home. You'll hear Sadie Beecham indicate that also during this time period in April, she finds Olivia to have a phone she didn't know that she had. She looks in the phone. She discovers and knows that it's the defendant, one of the multiple phones the defendant utilizes. And you'll hear both Sadie and Olivia describe multiple phones. The defendant has a phone that he uses primarily, but he has a couple of other phones, one in particular used to record. She's looking at one of those phones, and she sees the defendant has ordered 2 tracking devices from Amazon. They are auto-tracking devices you attach to a vehicle, and they're voice-activated recorders as well. So they have dual purpose for spying missions. Electronics to help you spy.
Yeah,
So by now,
that's the.
Sadie has heard from her daughter that there was this invasion
So it's their sole purpose is that's why that's the only that's the only reason why they were produced on this earth was to spy on people. Okay.
of her privacy on April 24th. She knows trackers have been purchased by the defendant. She knows through a number of texts how jealous and irrational he is regarding her beginnings of a new relationship. He is describing Rosalio Gutierrez as beaner, booger, using all sorts of abusive names and terminology for him. On May 8th, Sadie again does not have the children with her, and she is going to Rosalio's home. And based on the suspicions of what I've talked about that have occurred in the last couple of weeks, she thinks to herself at some point, you know what? He's probably tracking me. And so she searches her car, and she finds hidden under the car seat of one of the twins a phone that she knows belongs to the defendant, and it's on, meaning it would track her location. On May 8th, she drives to Kenosha. She turns that phone off. There's then a controversy between her and the defendant where he says, well, I just lost that phone. That phone must have toppled out of my pocket when I was working the car seat for one of the twins. Well, we know from looking at the electronics that he was using that phone and using an app he had just loaded on his phone recently, Find My Phone, to track her that very day. And so the things he told her about the circumstances were simply untrue. Instead, we know it was an app that he was using on that phone, connected to that phone, to figure out just where she would go on May 8th. Every time she brings this up, he acts like she's crazy. He acts like all the facts are false. But when you go into the electronics, when you go into his actual phone or computer, when you talk to Olivia, all the things she suspected and thought are actually true. The defendant is again and again fundamentally dishonest with her, acting as if these are all in her head or are accidents. Let's talk about the continuing escalation that this pattern that I've described shows. On May 13th, Sadie again does not have the children. Again, as a consulting adult, she decides to go down to visit Rosalio at his home address in Kenosha. Now, I want you to understand what we talked about. April 24th, May 8th, and now May 13th. Because we are talking about just weeks, just days, before Rosalio Gutierrez at this same location is never again seen by those who love him. Is essentially dead to those who love him. So now May 13th, we're 4 days away from that fateful day. On May 13th, Sadie goes down to Rosalio's. She is going down for food and to watch some movies. On the phone of the defendant, when taken into custody, on that phone, we have in the phone recordings of directions that look like GPS-type directions, which direct you. They are deleted, but they are recovered. We don't have every one of them, but the pattern of them gets you to Rosalio's address. This is the defendant's phone that is traveling per those directions that were deleted to Rosalio's home on the.
You don't actually have him traveling there, though, do you? No, you just have deleted texts of what the route would be like if he drove there. So I don't think they actually had. Sorry, my eye itches and I can't get it. It's just one of those days. All right, so yeah, they don't actually have him going to Rosalio's, whereas they actually have Rosalio, and his GPS, his phone data is if you follow it, it goes directly to Zach's house. So prior to when he went missing. So who's the one that's threatening who here? I don't know.
Same date Sadie has gone down there. Now Sadie is in Rosalio's home. And I want you to picture this, that this is what the evidence will be. Conversations you have as you start your meal and you're sitting down to watch something on TV. Rosalio says something specific to her about, do you want to watch this or something else? Conversations that many of you had as you begin to start your meal. Suddenly, right after it comes from the lips of Rosalio Gutierrez, she receives a text on her phone. The text is from the defendant. And the text is an exact quote of what Rosalio just said to her. It's an exact quote.
We don't have anything to confirm that. This is Sadie's word.
That he's just texted her. Now, he tells her later, oh, that's an accident. I didn't mean to text you. That was just an accident. But his phone, at that moment in time, is going off a Kenosha tower, not a tower by his home in Mequon, a Kenosha tower, and it's the tower closest to where Rosalio Gutierrez lives. So not only do the directions get him there, and by the way, have him arriving at the right time, But his phone places him at that location, quoting what is being said inside. I must be in control. Every gesture has the same pattern. I must be in control. By the next day, May 14th, we are now literally 3 days from Rosalio Gutierrez being dead to everyone who knows him. May 14th, the defendant now is looking for a confrontation based on his text messages to Sadie. May 14th, 4:13 p.m. You want me to stop by to meet Junior tonight? 4:41 p.m., half hour later. Still not off this topic. So, you're saying I can stop by and meet someone later. Now, none of Sadie's communications are inviting him over, let's make peace, let's talk, why don't you come on over, why don't you two meet? This is the defendant attempting to provoke.
How about maybe he was trying to meet the person that he knew was going to be in his kids' lives because Sadie was being shady.
But revealing his intentions. This is a communication suggesting I am looking for a confrontation. Here's what Olivia says about the period we've talked about so far. She says, every time I and the twins come over, this is the daughter, I apologize, this is the daughter, age 12. Every time we come over, he leaves and goes to follow mom. Every time we kids come over. She says to law enforcement, I am his spy about mom. I did it to please him. Here's a plan that she describes, age 12, to law enforcement that the defendant has cooked up and convinced her to be ready to implement. A spy operation. You ready? The 12-year-old says, on an occasion where I and the kids are brought to my dad's house because it's a visit, and where I know that my mom is going over to Rosalio's home, the plan is I will call my dad and that my dad will drive us kids back to mom's house, which of course would be unoccupied, right? Because Sadie would have gone to Rosalio's home. So my dad will drive us back to the unoccupied house. It's important I keep a key so that I can get in even though mom's not there. I and the twins will go into the house, and then I will call my dad and tell my dad, even though he's just dropped me off, hey, mom abandoned us and left us alone. This is the 12-year-old telling law enforcement that this is the plan that the defendant devised for her, his spy. And she said, at that point, my dad would report this. He would report that my mom had left us abandoned.
From what I've read and seen and heard, whatnot, I believe that Zach was becoming concerned that Sadie was acting not like a very good mother anymore. Like all of a sudden she just started going out and partying and going to clubs and like lying about men she was meeting and dating, and but yet also still stringing Zach along and calling him Z-Bear and things like that, even though they were done. So I don't know. That's coming from two different sides. So who do you believe?
That is the lengths that we're willing to go to get control, to end this relationship. They call it the plan. It's discussed multiple times. Now, on May 16th, 2020, one day before Rosalio Gutierrez is never again seen by those who love him, May 16th. Remember I told you on May 17th how full of hope Sadie was. Well, here's why. On the 16th of May, Sadie gets a communication from Rosalio saying to her, would you like to come meet my kids? Rosalio has a boy 11 and a girl 8. They're at his house for the weekend on the 15th and 16th.
Can anyone explain to me why Rosalio is having Sadie come over and meet his kids while he's still talking to all these other people, including Narita, who he was having a date with the next night, and then some other chick who he lied to. Sorry, I call other women chicks if you don't like it. Sorry. Some other woman that he lied to, Kim Lavora, that he lied to about being at Menards that night, and that's why he was not going to be able to talk to her for a little while. He was going to go shopping. So.
And she's being invited for the first time to meet his kids. And they go for ice cream. And I think Sadie will tell you that this is a truly meaningful moment in her life. Still today, when those few hours she spent with those kids and Rosalio. She left for the night. She didn't spend the night. It was the last time she ever saw Rosalio Gutierrez. But it meant something to her, because it's not an exclusive relationship, but it felt like her hopes that this relationship was going to build and get bigger and get better and maybe be the relationship for her, it felt like this really mattered. Here's how the defendant was handling that same business. You race down to Kenosha every chance you get to lay down with some Down syndrome Mexican version of your father. That's a text from the defendant to Sadie trying to impose himself in this real moment in her life. He's texting spy Stephen Lentz, who lives...
She's crying now. Are they real tears? What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below.
Just close enough to Sadie that he can see if cars are in her driveway, so he's a good lookout, right? He's a good lookout post. This is the defendant to Stephen Lentz on May 16th, asking if she has a car in her driveway. Remember, she doesn't have the kids. So whether a car's in her driveway or not is frankly none of his business. But his spy is being employed at that moment. So on the 17th of May, that's the...
This is Rosalio's mother. This is his stepfather, and this man sitting at the prosecution's bench is actually the lead detective, Detective Correa, who he was the lead detective in this case. He does not sit in through the whole trial, but we see him at least on this day. I'm not sure about others.
The day after this big moment where Sadie met his kids. And Sadie has said throughout this case that it feels like the defendant is some way monitoring all her communications. Everything that she's communicating with Rosalio feels like the defendant seems to somehow know it in real time. No one knows how that happened. That's how it is. So at 1:52 p.m., this is literally 8 hours before Rosalio Gutierrez is gone and dead to everyone who knows him. 1:52 p.m., Sadie texts Rosalio. Sadie says to him in the text, "I want to be yours and get more serious with our relationship." Okay, that's how she felt after she met his kids. That's her putting herself out there, right? Not an exclusive relationship, but here it is. So there's some text back and forth. Rosalio calls her at 8:30 p.m. that night. This is an hour and a half before he's never seen again, and she misses that call. His last text to her is at 8:36 p.m., his phone to her phone. She never hears from him again. She tries him on the 18th of May. This is a relationship where they are in communication in some way, shape, or form several times a day during this period of time. On the 18th, absolutely no communication from him. On the 19th in the morning, still absolutely no communication from him. And so finally, she jumps in her car and she drives from the Milwaukee area on that morning. What is going on? Trying to figure out what's happening. And she gets to his home in Kenosha. And she finds that the sliding door is open. You'll see in the pictures, Rosalio Gutierrez has that apartment in an apartment complex that's the bottom floor, and his slider and his screen face right onto the road. So the sliding door is open, the screen is closed, and she looks in, and boy, does she see a lot of blood. And she calls 911. And at the moment she calls 911 and law enforcement gets there, there will be a number of things that law enforcement focus on in their investigation. And I'd ask you to think about these areas of focus as you think about the evidence as it comes in this case. One area of focus is, when was Rosalio Gutierrez last alive to those people who know him? The second area of investigation is, who has the motive and who has any pattern of conduct where they would be a person we should look to as a person who might have finished that pattern, completed that pattern, or acted on their motive and ended Rosalio Gutierrez's life. And then the third, of course, area of investigation was, where is the body of Rosalio Gutierrez? And I'm not going to belabor that in this opening. You'll hear about very substantial efforts in many jurisdictions involving many agencies to look for the body of Rosalio Gutierrez, which is never found. So on May 19th, okay, so this is 2 days after Rosalio has last been heard from, at 11:07 a.m., the Kenosha Police Department is at Rosalio's address. And they find through their investigation before too long that the last person in touch with him appears to be a woman whose last name is Macias, who received a text from him at 9:27 p.m. on the 17th, okay? And then she texted him back because she arrived at a building she thought was his.
My mic was muted. Whoops. Just realized. So pay attention now. He's the district attorney is talking about Narita Macias. She's the star witness for which side we don't know. She was the star witness originally for the defense, and now she's the star witness for the prosecution because she changed her story, which just drastically changed the whole timeline of the events. So just pay attention, because remember, this is why they got a mistrial.
Turns out she was at the wrong building, but she thought she was in his building, and she calls him and texts him multiple times over the next half hour. Where are you? She'd never been here before. Are you coming out? You know, that kind of stuff. And there's never again an answer. So sometime after 9:27 p.m., the state's going to suggest to you all that blood results, and Rosalio Gutierrez is no more, to those who know him. They go through family and friends, and no one has heard from him since that 9:27 p.m. time on May 17th, through any other method of communication. And so law enforcement focuses on Sadie Beecham. Remember, she called 911. She's still at the scene. She is distraught. She's shaking. She's overcome. And she's really focused. Members of the jury, you'll hear the officer testify. She's really focused on getting her kids safe. She's afraid that the defendant has done this and that her kids might not be safe.
And the detectives let her leave the scene. She's the one that calls. They didn't even investigate her. Like, come on. You didn't even, like, crime solving 101. The person that found the person, or the person that calls in, or the boyfriend, girlfriend, whoever, like, that's the number one person that you suspect. I get that they're saying it's the jealous ex-boyfriend, but his testimony and things that come in all corroborate what he says, what his side of things were when he was investigated or interrogated. He didn't even realize he was being interrogated.
Because of what she sees. And so she is allowed to prioritize that, and then this investigation, of course, continues. Rosalio's vehicles are still at the residence. His keys are there. There is a large amount of blood all over his residence in several rooms. The outer hallway, including outer hallway in a way suggests that door opening into the hallway was open at a time when significant bleeding happened, including sprayed blood that looks like it's impact type of blood. There's blood then right inside the door, as if someone is now in the apartment and they are continuing to have some sort of intervention or attack happen where their blood is spraying. That blood is all over that now closed door on that interior. It is all over the rug area there and on the walls and on the tables. It extends to the dining room table. It extends to the chairs on the dining room table. Some of it hits the laptop. Some of it is in the kitchen counter. Some of it is pooled blood throughout that area where you are first in the entrance. There is a small stick of processed wood, like a baseball bat or some other hard object. It's not a log. It's not a piece of cut timber. That piece of wood ends up having blood on it, which is found to be the blood of Rosalio Gutierrez, and hair on it as well, which is also found to be Rosalio Gutierrez. There is significant blood on the curtains, which are on the entire other end of the apartment from where that entrance to the hallway comes. There is blood on the fan. There's blood on the ceiling in multiple rooms of this apartment. There is pooled and seeped blood into the carpet in the living room on the floor area, and seeped blood, a significant quantity of seeped blood on the couch that is the primary couch in that living room. And in the middle of the area by the couch, there is a a missing area where there's blood surrounding it, but then there's a rectangled off area that has no blood whatsoever. It's pristine, which certainly suggests to anybody who looks at it that an area rug, a medium sort of size area rug, was there when significant bleeding happened and is now missing from that apartment. There are little splinters of wood on the couch that are also there, interspersed in the blood and interspersed in hair that is located, strands of hair located on that couch as well. Law enforcement tests several locations at various places. You'll hear where they tested. Each time they tested and they found that it was blood, each of those times the blood came from one individual, and that was Rosalio Gutierrez. You will hear that the blood is sprayed, meaning there was impact in multiple locations and multiple different times based on where the blood is located and how the blood presents or looks when law enforcement is present. Remember, present 2 days, about a day and a half after the event. Again, that area rug is completely missing. You'll hear that you might hear some testimony about something called arterial spray, where there's a finer, misty place there too. So some of what you might hear is blunt force trauma, hard objects hitting a bleeding surface. Some areas that you might hear about are more likely, or at least are possible areas where maybe a knife or some sharp object penetrated someone as opposed to blunt force.
We do not know what was ever used as a weapon. We still don't know what exactly his injuries were to be leaving his red fluid DNA all over the place. We don't know what his injuries were to make that happen. We don't know what happened, what the weapon was either. So it's hard to tie a suspect without a body and without a weapon. Just keep that in mind.
Rosalio's own phone records say that he dropped his kids off because he had them that weekend. He dropped them off on the 17th, and then he went home, and he was home by 9:08 p.m. So just within an hour of when he's never seen again. Opened a beer, drank a beer. I think maybe opened a second beer. Was expecting Miss Macias to arrive. His TV was on, and his phone it goes off at 10:30 p.m. around, and that's found several days later, hidden in his freezer. His phone and his credit cards are behind.
His phone orientation changed at 10:10. He didn't even get the time right. He said 10:40 or something.
Behind all the items in his freezer, hidden there. In the cold, the phone goes off. The last time that phone is on in any way, shape, or form is around 10:30 p.m. on the 17th.
10:10 p.m.
Rosalio's keys are there. His wallet has ended up on the couch over some areas that already had blood, so it's placed there after the bleeding occurred. As I said, his credit cards were found in the apartment. There's been no evidence that his credit cards or his bank accounts or any other identifying pieces of that type have been used ever in the 1,018 days since. The home, you'll see the pictures, is filled with pictures of his two children, 11 and 8. He didn't miss gymnastic events. He was an enthusiastic baseball coach for his 11-year-old. You will hear electronic media talk about his excitement and planning for his coaching of his 11-year-old that will be starting literally just days, certainly weeks. Baseball season is right around the corner, and watching his son play baseball was one of the true pleasures of his life. 2 days after he is gone, he has in his date book, his planner, that he is going to be at Camp Timberley with his children. Some of you may know that, local summer camp. That's a 2-day, that's an experience that's supposed to occur on May 19th, just 2 days after this. He never arrives, he never accounts for this with his kids. Obviously, he never coaches baseball. In fact, neither of his kids, who talked to him all the time, who saw him every week, who were in contact with him multiple times a week. You'll hear that his 11-year-old son spoke to him during this time period multiple times per day.
Because there's not a body in this case, they really have to prove that he's missing, and that the normal people that he would talk to on a regular basis are, they haven't heard from him. So I don't think they do the greatest of jobs doing that. I mean, I guess his mother is the best witness to do that, but I still think that, I don't know, I still think there's a question as to whether he's even alive or not.
And there was never another split second of communication, and has not been for 1,018 days. He has missed their birthdays. He and his mother had a very close relationship, very close. and he has missed all of her important occasions in the last 1,018 days. And the kids he was so devoted for. Never, ever before missed these occasions. Never before, ever out of touch his entire life with the people who cared about him, and not a peep from him since. So I'm back to who the police should go to first. The defendant has actively admitted to Sadie that he is jealous, that he has admitted to Sadie, and then finally to law enforcement, that he took his 11-year-old, as I mentioned, to the mom's home. He has a recording of that incident in his phone, brief recording of that in his phone, and
he said he didn't have any recordings when he was at the law enforcement when they were interviewing him. So I don't know if he really does have a recording of that. I think that was something that OA said, his daughter, or their daughter, Sadie and Zach's daughter, may have said something along those lines, that he took video or she saw video, and ever since then the prosecution is taking it as he had a video on his phone and he did this and that and da, 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 da. So I don't know. I think a lot of this is twisted and spun for the prosecution. I'm just saying.
So law enforcement certainly focuses on the person who has documented motive and jealousy documented. All of this is interesting because it happens while the defendant, according to a woman, his girlfriend, Christine Remsburg, is literally living or staying 4 or 5 nights a week at his girlfriend's home. So what I'm describing to you are things he is doing only when he has his kids over, if he is actually traveling around, or he is doing it despite the fact he continues to have this relationship with, when she's interviewed in May of 2020, she says this relationship has been going on about a year, and that he spends 4 to 5 nights a week at her house. But the motive for the defendant is to end this relationship and to do anything he must to stay in control. So the defendant has his kids on this weekend of May 16th and 17th, right? This is the fateful weekend. Sadie picks those kids up in the afternoon. So in the late afternoon, she picks those kids up. And the daughter will tell you, 12 years old, the back of my dad's van, his minivan, which he used to transport us on the afternoon of the 17th, so the same day this happens, was normal. There were no bleach stains and no problems with the carpet in the back of his minivan when she last saw it on the afternoon of the 17th. So now the question is, what is the evidence that
when she saw it, though, the seats were in the van, so she wouldn't have seen in the back of the van from where she was sitting in the passenger seat. Yet she's adamant that the carpet was
the defendant
there.
Prepared for this attack, this murder? Well, one of the things he did was on May 15th, he took out $50,000 in cash from his account. When law enforcement gets there, he still has more than $46,000 in cash. You're going to see pictures of the bank bag, literally all the money.
And again, that's for his real estate renos that he does with his brother to turn a profit.
Still bound together. So he's got that, and the state will suggest to you that's in case anything goes wrong. You can make that quick.
That was so he could invest in a property, because I believe there was a property that they were looking at that time.
Run to some location to be out of harm's way or out of apprehension with that much money on hand. You'll hear the daughter indicate that when she left on Sunday afternoon, just hours before Rosalio Gutierrez is gone, that she saw rope and duct tape, new rope and new duct tape, down in his basement. It was down on top of essentially a wheelie, a desk chair that's down there. When law enforcement gets to this location on the 19th, there is a wheelie chair down there in the basement. The daughter is completely right about that, but no rope, no new rope, and no new duct tape. So the state would suggest to you that is ideal stuff if you think you need to move a person bleeding, dead. You need to seal up carpet, try to prevent as much bleeding as you possibly can from the body of the person you're removing from his own apartment.
Seal up
During
carpet.
this period of time, there's an extremely heavy rain going on in Kenosha and in the Milwaukee area. Very heavy rain. And so people are not out and about, obviously, in the same way they normally would be. Another way that the defendant prepares is when we go into his multiple phones, we find that the phone he usually uses to contact people, the phone that he usually uses in situations, is not being answered, though it is just before and just after, but not being answered from 7:30 p.m. to 11:19 p.m. Left behind the phone that had smart capabilities that would be tracked, left that behind, and so was not able to answer the calls and the texts that come from multiple people, including his girlfriend, Christine Remsburg, who tries to contact him multiple times because she is expecting him in those evening hours to come over. She's talking about what they're going to have for dinner. She's talking about what movie they're going to watch. And finally, she basically, sometime before 11:19 p.m., says, okay, I'm going to bed. She's expected him. And he never shows up at her house and never gives her an explanation.
He did give an explanation. He said that he fell asleep because he missed his afternoon nap.
Until after he would have time to drive from his home in Mequon to Kenosha, commit this crime.
Sometime. How, I mean, okay, you have to subdue the person somehow, that takes time. You have to finally end them, get them, wrapped up, put them in your van. That all takes an amount of time that would have been impossible in the time frame, the 1 hour and 9 minutes that it would have taken him to commit the crime and drive home with Rosalio's body in the truck.
And get back to the Mequon area, grab up the phone that he hasn't been answering, and now text her and says, oh, sorry, fell asleep. Fell asleep during the exact hours that...
I'm sorry, but I am a napper too. Sometimes I just get exhausted and sleep overcomes me, and I'll sleep for 3-4 hours at a time. No big deal. Like, if that happens, I know my body needs it. And I'm sure there's other people like that. Zach was a really hard worker, and he did hard manual labor work too. So that's exhausting on your body.
Rosalio Gutierrez is never seen again. And then has a very long conversation with her, like a 42-minute conversation with her from midnight to 12:49, maybe trying to get back in her good graces. Because she's back with him the next night. She comes to his house for one of the very first times she's ever come to his house. She comes to his house that night, the next night, and then the night after that, which is the night he's apprehended. So then I want to talk about the cover-up. Because a lot of times the way you can tell that somebody's responsible for something is their cover-up, right? That's a common way of determining somebody did something really bad. So officers get to the defendant in the evening hours. And so it's been 2 full days since Rosalio Gutierrez is gone to everyone who knows him. And prior to police getting there, a close couple of buddies of Rosalio Gutierrez, who have heard Rosalio Gutierrez say, hey, I've got this new woman I'm seeing, her name is Sadie, she's got a crazy ex-boyfriend, and maybe even he broke in my truck one time, right? So when Rosalio Gutierrez is missing, and the friend group begins to understand this, Michael Campbell is the type of friend who will drive to the person's house where that is suspected in his mind and just go and try to confront the guy. And so he and his buddy go there, and they beat the police.
And he's smiling as he says this, like this is a good thing. Michael Campbell's just the type of guy that goes over and confronts people when he thinks something. Like, yeah, that's called threatening and intimidating somebody.
There, because the police are still, doing the police thing. And they bring up, hey, our buddy Rosalio is missing. Do you know anything about this? And the defendant claims he's not his brother, claims he's not Zachariah Anderson. He claims he's his brother. He calls the cops. By then, these guys have already left. They're not trying to fight anybody or anything else. They're simply trying to ask a question. This guy's clearly not going to answer their question, and they leave. So he already knows by that moment that Rosalio Gutierrez, this person he's focused on, who he's been to his house, he's texted a direct quote of what he said, he's done all sorts of other stuff regarding him, he's certainly communicated to Sadie many times about him. This guy's missing. When they go on the 19th and they look inside that minivan of the defendants, they find that the back is bleached. There's all sorts of bleach stains on the back carpeting. That the seats are out, just the front seats are in, and the back...
Guys, we looked at pictures of the back of the van. Does it look like it had been cleaned recently or bleached to remove stains? First of all, there were stains on the carpet, but it didn't even respond to bleach, so we don't know what was staining the carpet there. And secondly, they obviously looked like old stains, and you wouldn't be able to clean up BLOOD that well with bleach on that little spot there. I don't know. It would definitely have left remnants. You would have gotten DNA off of the luminol testing, which there wasn't any luminol. There was one tiny little pinprick of DNA that they thought they found in the back of the truck, or at the back of Zach's van, but you can't even see it lit up when you in the picture. And they claim it's Rosalio's, but we'll get to Lisa Treffinger's testimony too. So, all right, let's move on.
A third of the carpeting in that van has literally been cut out. So you're down to where the electronics is exposed. You're down to the plastic flooring under. The carpeting from the minivan is missing, is cut out. where on the 17th in the afternoon, his daughter said, yeah, it was in there. Nothing was cut out of there. And there was no bleach. Fresh smell of bleach. Carpet cut out in the last 48 hours. You'll hear that in the early morning hours.
Who said that his car smelled fresh like bleach? If you look at his car, it is filthy. Like, there's stuff everywhere. If a body was in that truck, there would have been stuff everywhere left over because that truck had not been cleaned.
On the 18th, so let's say defendant arrives back in Mequon. By 4:18 a.m., he's searching for area stores by him and when they first open. So he puts in Menards, he puts in Walmart, he's going through all the basic.
He's a contractor. He does construction and other kind of home improvement type work. I would expect him to go to a Home Depot anytime, all the time, almost daily. Especially, in COVID, looking up the store hours of places is not unheard of because everybody's store hours varied at that time and if they were even open. So you had to look.
Basic stores. Which of them opens first is essentially his line of inquiry. And he ends up getting a Walmart, opens at 8. This search happened at 4:18 a.m. Okay, this is now about 6 hours after Rosalio.
Well, we know that Zach doesn't sleep well because he texts Sadie in the middle of the night and he's looking up stores in the middle of the night. Anyways, I feel like I need to stop this at like every sentence he just says because there's a point that I want to refute, but I'm going to just let him talk and I'll let Nicole do a lot of the refuting.
Gutierrez is last known alive, and you will decide what to make of this. The defendant arrives there just after 8, like 8:15, 8:18. It's pouring rain. It's still pouring rain, just as it was the day before. Pouring rain parking lot, not many cars. He parks as far as you can humanly park that minivan.
Didn't.
From the entrance.
No.
And he walks that whole distance in, as opposed to parking in any of the probably hundreds of spots that are closer. He parks as far away as possible. Does he have the body still in the back of that car?
He parked far, but has anybody been to a Walmart? Do you know that it's like almost impossible to get a parking spot that's close? So, certain Walmarts that I know are going to be packed, I just park far. And then, well, back when my hips worked and I could walk, I would. But I would just park at the very end of the parking lot, the opposite end of the building, so that I could just, not have to avoid all the traffic and people looking for a spot. Plus, I do want to point out that he was parked next to other people and he did not have tinted windows. He had windows in his van. Anybody could have looked in his van and seen a body if he had one there. So I don't think that, well, this guy's argument isn't great.
Car wrapped in that rug. He buys, with cash, bleach, rubber gloves.
He bought Lysol wipes, not bleach. Lysol or Clorox wipes because pandemic.
Garbage bags, shampoo.
Tall kitchen garbage bags, not big enough to hide a 270-pound man.
Q-tips. Pays cash, leaves, and heads over to an area where he is doing home demo and rent. He's doing some demo at a lake house in the Belgium, Wisconsin area. A little more isolated locations, not his house, in case law enforcement was already looking for him, in case the body had been discovered. This is on the 18th in the morning, okay, just hours after Rosalio Gutierrez has never been seen. He's at that location, according to his phone, for 3 hours. And then leaves.
Working?
Goes to many other locations, but near that location, so within that immediate area, is a state park, is Lake Michigan, is a number of other remote locations, and hundreds of dumpsters, right, over the course of any area in Wisconsin.
Yeah, but did you find him in any of those spots? No, you didn't.
There are hundreds of dumpsters where you might put the remains of Rosalio Gutierrez. He's got a burn pit at his house that he has smoldering when the cops get there 2 days later. He's been operating the burn pit in the pouring rain. In it are an underwear band from Fruit of the Loom underwear.
Oh, no.
Jean buttons, steel-toed boot components. Did he burn some clothes that he might have been wearing on that day? Officers eventually get into the defendant's laptop. When they get into it, they find a file that's labeled Rosalio Gutierrez Jr. So it's got his name. This is before law enforcement talks to him. I mean, I'm sorry, they don't know this. They haven't been in his computer when they speak to him. But he's typed in the name, Rosalio Gutierrez Jr. In that are picture after picture screenshots of Facebook photos of Rosalio Gutierrez out socializing, but also a number of pictures of him with his kids. And we're going to show those to you to let you think about whether this is obsessive sign of dangerous behavior, to have collected these kind of photos in this folder on your laptop. It's got business info, it's got CCAP entries, it's got an electronic map that's pinned to the actual location of Rosalio's home. And then in that same file, under that same label, he's got a picture of one of these trackers. Just a photo with a tracker, like a screenshot, right? Auto tracker, voice activated, that spy equipment that he has ordered and paid for just days before. So the defendant, when law enforcement speaks to him on May 19th, knows Rosalio Gutierrez is missing, knows they want to talk to him about the possible stalking of Rosalio Gutierrez. That's what they tell him they're talking about. He knows what he has been doing. He knows the facts that we've described happened. There's no way the defendant does not understand how important a moment this is. Here's his chance. He's an innocent man, right, to talk about exactly...
If he's an innocent man, he wouldn't know how important this moment in time is where you're questioning him as your buddies, when really in reality you were interrogating him. By the end of it, he was shocked and surprised that he was going to prison or jail, because you didn't even act like you were trying to hear his side of anything or corroborate any information from Sadie or him. You didn't do an investigation.
What the details are that will exonerate him. Let's clear this up. Here's what the defendant does. When asked what vehicle he drives, he wants to stick with that he drives the Audi vehicle. In actual fact, Christine Remsburg is driving the defendant's Audi around because her car's on the fritz, so he hasn't driven that car around recently much at all. In the Walmart video, for instance, on the 18th, he's driving the minivan. When he drives the kids back and forth on the 17th, he's driving the minivan. He decides to only share that he's driving the Audi. Why not bring up the minivan? Why not tell him right away, hey, the car I'm using is the minivan. Please go search it. Go do whatever you want. Go take a look at my minivan. Absolutely. Instead, he wants to talk about the Audi. Reluctantly indicates that the minivan is a vehicle. Oh, but anybody could drive it. That's how he...
I'm not sure that's what happened, but I do know that they have other people that they employ, and that's why they wanted to put trackers on their cars, him and his brother, because other people may go on a project, run to a project for them, and you want to know that they are where they say they are.
He decides to behave knowing how important this moment is. He acts to these officers, tries to give these officers the officers the impression he doesn't even know this Mexican guy's name. I think they call him Junior, something like that, he wants to say. Well, he's written Rosalio Gutierrez Jr. in his computer. He's told his daughter the name of Rosalio Gutierrez. There's a phone message or a phone recording that he records between him and Sadie where he finally admits, okay, I told her the name. And yet with law enforcement on the 19th, he chooses to act as if this is not even a name he knows. He says Olivia gets that from a grandma, when in fact, he admits to Sadie that's not the case. He denies ever being at Rosalio's home to the officers, where we know based on the electronic evidence, both his text and his own phone, that he's there on May 13th. We know that. But he chooses to deny that he has been there. In fact, says, I don't think I've been to Kenosha. Though his phone is going off a Kenosha tower when he is directly quoting Rosalio. Then, he's asked a very simple question. Again, this is the 19th. Where were you in the evening 2 days earlier? Okay? Not where were you 5 Wednesdays ago. Where were you in the evening 2 days ago? He says, yeah, I was with my girlfriend, Christine Remsburg, spent the night over there, that's where I was. Later goes off that, later changes that up a little bit, but that's what he wants to go with. When Christine Remsburg, who has been with him the last 2 nights after he didn't show up at her house on the date of this homicide, when she's asked that question, also during this exact same time period, where was he? She also chooses to provide false information about his whereabouts. She says, yeah, he was with me.
Maybe she just didn't remember because it was a couple nights ago and they usually spend the nights together, so she didn't think about it.
And that's completely false. She eventually is exposed because her sister says, that's not what happened, and when confronted with that, she says, okay, you're right. He wasn't at my house. So the two of them have exactly the same false information about where he was. So you are going to finally hear.
So he's obviously fabricating.
One is when the crime lab examines the van in question. These are people who are the experts in the state at trying to figure out whether there's worthwhile evidence and then trying to do the appropriate testing of evidence having to do with DNA in the state. And so the experts come and the van is eventually brought to them, and they go through that van and they identify a particular location that is near the back, so in that same 1/3 of the minivan where the carpet has now been cut out, but it's about halfway up and it's on the plastic panel and it's just a little speck. And when the two DNA and crime scene analysts, when the DNA and crime scene analysts see that, they both say, we think that's blood. But it's so small that they decide that is just going to be our observation. We're not going to use a chemical on it. We're afraid we might not get DNA if we do that. So they observe, they believe it's blood.
So if they did a presumptive test by putting, whatever it is they spray on there, and then it comes back or it reacts, then you know that you've got such and such DNA. But if you do that, then you run the risk of degrading your sample because it's so small, so you won't have any sample to test. So instead of doing a presumptive test, they decided not to do that. So they don't know for sure if it is DNA of a human or whatever. And then they tested it for the DNA later in the lab.
It is taken to the crime lab, it is tested, and based on the results, again, the analyst, Lisa Treffinger, will tell you she believes it's blood. She believes that based on the process of elimination. It's not semen, it's not skin cells, it's not saliva, it's not a piece of hair, and therefore, based on the content, based on what we can get on the results, it is blood. I believe it to be blood. She'll offer that opinion to you. She'll also tell you that her test tells her that blood is the DNA of Rosalio Gutierrez.
Her past tells her that?
There's not any evidence he's ever been in this van, certainly that he's ever bled in this van, that he has anything to do with this van. And his blood, his DNA, is located on that speck amidst the area, not in the same area, but in the van filled with bleach and with cutout carpet. Cutout carpet is never found, by the way. Clothes that the defendant was wearing on the 17th are never found, by the way. Then finally, you're going to hear evidence of an individual, an inmate named Marquand Washington. Marquand Washington has very serious federal charges that are going on right now, and he's being federal charges.
No.
You'll hear him say that several months ago, he came forward to his attorney and told his attorney that I previously roomed with, I shared a cell, I was a bunkmate with, that when that occurred,
that's frustrating.
That we bonded over some common sort of criminal activity. So, we talked, and I'm not going to talk about the details, but that they bonded over some discussions of their life prior to this date. You'll hear that Marquand Washington was able to tell details about the case, such as when the police raided.
Okay, he's almost done. I'm going to skip him. We're going to skip through, and we'll start with Nicole Muller's opening statement. So you got the gist of.
Is that evidence wasn't readily given.
You got the gist of the prosecutor's opening statement. I'm gonna move.
He then texts someone at 11:19.
This is annoying.
Then they don't have any the evidence that it.
Where does she start? Okay, here.
Come
Sorry.
during this trial.
There we go.
But at the end of the day, law enforcement nor the state have no idea what happened to Mr. Gutierrez's body. They don't know when exactly anything happened in Mr. Gutierrez's apartment. They have no idea where any alleged remains of Mr. Gutierrez's body is. They have none of that. There are no witnesses that saw my client, Mr. Zachariah Anderson, at 3709 15th Avenue in Kenosha on May 17th, 2020. They have absolutely no witnesses that say, hey, we saw Mr. Anderson and he had bloody clothes or he was acting suspicious. They have none of that because none of that evidence exists. No body, no human remains, no indication of cleaning up a crime scene despite what they say occurred in that van. I'll talk to you a little about that later. They don't have any of that. Yet they decided to build a script, and the evidence will show you this. They decided to build a script and tell a story and make Mr. Anderson the main character. despite the fact that they didn't have any of this evidence. No body, no human remains, no witnesses, nothing. If you're looking in the wrong places and at the wrong people, you are not going to find the information you're looking for. The state just talked to you at length about some of the evidence that it believes is going to come in, and that evidence is going to show you that Mr. Anderson committed the crimes as charged. And the state and myself, he explained to you kind of what opening statements are. I'm not going to do that. You're all capable people of understanding why we're speaking to you right now. But I'm speaking because I see the evidence a little bit differently. And when I'm walking you through the evidence that will come in today, it's not based on speculation. It's not based on some theories that are in my head where there's no evidence to back that up. I'm going to walk you through the actual evidence that will come through during this trial. But let's start with what the state kind of walked you through. That this really all stems because Mr. Anderson is a crazy, jealous, obsessive ex. The evidence during this trial will debunk that theory. And in addition to that issue, motive is not an element of the crime. In order to be threatened by a serious relationship has to exist. The state talked about how things were getting heavy between Mr. Gutierrez and Ms. Beecham, that they were meeting each other's kids, that there was talk about that. What the state didn't inform you was that Mr. Gutierrez was actively dating and seeing several other women. He was not in any means exclusive with Ms. Beecham. He had in fact told some of his closest friends that he was intending on breaking up with Ms. Beecham. Ms. Beecham had never met a single one of Mr. Gutierrez's friends. And this concept of that the state talked about how, she had never talked to her child about Mr. Gutierrez, or that information must have come from Mr. Anderson. That's not accurate. And the text messages that will come in will establish that Ms. Beecham had discussed Mr. Gutierrez with her daughter. There were text messages that she sent to Mr. Gutierrez that says, Liv wants to meet your kids before she meets you. Well, obviously, she must have had a conversation with her daughter about who Mr. Gutierrez was.
Yep.
But still doesn't change the underlying factor that this was not a serious relationship. Additionally, from February of 2020 through May of 2020, there was consistent communication between Mr. Anderson and Ms. Beecham. And that communication wasn't, oh, I want you so bad, come back with me. It was kind of a mutual agreement that their relationship was toxic. They were never getting back together, that she had guys she was seeing, and Mr. Anderson had his own girlfriend.
Yeah, he says.
The timeline. The state said that the timeline shows Mr. Anderson must have been involved, but the state's ignoring critical evidence as to that timeline. The state admitted May 17th, 2020, Mr. Anderson had his kids, his 3 children. They were at his home in Mequon, Wisconsin. That later in that afternoon, around 5 to 6, Ms. Beecham picks them up. Mr. Anderson then, they don't have any evidence that Mr. Anderson left his home.
Nope.
They claim that this is the time where he traveled down to Kenosha, but you'll hear from law enforcement officers that they got surveillance video from multiple places, not only in the Mequon, Ozaukee County area that Mr. Anderson would have had to pass to get to Mr. Gutierrez's apartment, but they also got surveillance from gas stations, schools, the transit authority, from the buses, from neighbors' ring cameras from the area in Kenosha that Mr. Anderson would have had to have passed if he was driving. And you'll hear from law enforcement that they don't observe Mr. Anderson's vehicle. So the state has absolutely, there will be no evidence during this trial that will be presented to you that shows that on May 17th, 2020, when Sadie Beecham is at Mr. Anderson's home, she sees him there. He then texts someone at 11:19 p.m., and you'll hear from law enforcement officers that his phone pings at his home at 11:19 p.m.
Yep.
Nothing shows he ever left home that night. People falling asleep around 7 to 8 p.m. as adults who have children and have been with them all day, that's not unreasonable. So the next morning, he wakes up, he goes to Walmart. You'll hear evidence that Mr. Anderson's a contractor. He was going to a home up in Cedar Grove area that he was working on. He was doing...
I also wanted to point out that we know he had sleeping problems because he'd be up at 4 in the morning searching things, or up at like 2, 3 in the morning texting Sadie, because I feel like he was still struggling with feelings for her. I feel like he still loved her and didn't want to let go of that, but I think that he knew that it was over, or, that it just wasn't going to work. So he tried to not love her, but I mean, you can't help who you love. And sometimes that you're not good together. So I don't know. I still don't see it as anyways. Well, we know that, if he had sleeping problems, it'd be easy to fall asleep. That was my only thing. If he had sleeping issues at night, You know, it's really easy to fall asleep at 7:30, 8:30 at night. I do it just about every night. Ask my boyfriend. I have not been able to stay up for a Bulls game lately. It's really driving me nuts. But anyways, so let's let Nicole keep going here.
Lath removal and other serious removal jobs. It was basically a complete reconstruction of the property. And so if he went to Walmart and parked far away, you'll hear evidence that he had tools in his van. And in addition to that, he then goes to his job site for 3 hours. And the state's saying that after that, they don't know where he goes. No idea.
That's not true.
The evidence will establish that after he was at the house in Cedar Grove for 3 hours, he went to Menominee Falls to pick up his taxes. That's a nice fact that the state didn't talk about that will come in. And what's interesting about the fact that Mr. Anderson had gone and picked up his taxes in Menominee Falls right after working at his job site in the morning is that that evidence wasn't readily given to the defense. That you'll hear that this evidence, this receipt that's dated 5/18/2020 from the Tax Accountant Services was a piece of paper that was located in Mr. Anderson's van. And that law enforcement, when they executed the search on Mr. Anderson's property, they took all the papers.
That's Brady. That they just hid exculpatory evidence, but okay.
And put them in a pile and labeled them miscellaneous papers. And they took one picture of all of those papers and put that into discovery, and that picture's blurry. You'll see that picture. It wasn't until the defense asked to see that documentation that we saw this receipt that proved that Mr. Anderson wasn't, for hours, getting rid of a body, but was going to pick up his taxes in Menominee Falls. And you'll hear from the accountants that he was there. You'll also hear from them that they had video surveillance, that law enforcement, had they gone and talked to these people, would have been able to get that surveillance video to see what Mr. Anderson was wearing, the fact that he didn't have any blood on his clothes. And then after he picks up his taxes, he goes back home and spends the night with his girlfriend, Christine Rensburg. The next morning, they wake up. It's a normal day. But it's not normal for Mr. Anderson because two random people show up on his property demanding that they speak with a person named Zachariah Anderson. And Mr. Anderson knows that he doesn't know these people. They don't know what he looks like. So he says, hey, I'm his brother. He's not here right now. What do you want? And they say, as the state noted, we're looking for our missing friend from Kenosha. And these people are snooping around his property, acting suspicious. And so what does Mr. Anderson do? He calls 911 himself and says, hey, there's these two random people that are on my property demanding to speak with me. I told them that I'm my brother because I'm a little concerned about why they're here, and they're demanding questions about
If you just unalived somebody, would you be calling the police? Probably not.
their missing friend from Kenosha. The man who the state's alleging had something to do with the disappearance of Mr. Gutierrez is calling 911 and saying they're saying that I had something to do with this missing guy from Kenosha. Law enforcement responds to the home, but it's not to respond to Mr. Anderson's concerns. They're there to arrest Mr. Anderson and to execute a search warrant on his property.
Yep.
He's taken into custody.
Guys, this is so scary. This could happen to any one of us. You could have a crazy ex that's scheming something behind your back and wants to get you arrested. I'm not saying that's what happened. But it almost appears that way. But anyways, I'm not saying that's what happened. I'm just saying that this kind of scenario for a person who is completely innocent of the crimes that they are alleged of could be convicted and have a jury, convict them as guilty, all of it, so easily, based on putting together a good narrative by the state and not putting forth all the information that exculpates them, like Walmart receipts and stuff.
Custody. They take pictures of what he's wearing. White t-shirt, blue jeans. They send some of those, they say, oh, there looks to appear to be a stain on the shirt. Let's swab it and send it to the crime lab, not blood. No DNA of Mr. Gutierrez. Oh, the jeans, looks like there's another red dot. Let's swab it and send it to the crime lab. No blood, no DNA linking back to Rosalio Gutierrez. They took pictures, you'll see these, of Mr. Anderson's hands, feet, arms, not a single scratch, not a single bruise, nothing.
We looked at those.
So the state's assertion that there's going to be evidence that Mr. Anderson had time to get rid of every single possible piece of evidence, the body, all remains, everything that he used to clean up. The state talked about some items bought at Walmart. They were 13-gallon trash bags and 2 things of Clorox wipes.
Yeah.
Don't think that's enough to meticulously clean up a crime scene, nor is there any evidence that that is. Additionally, as you'll hear, this was during the height of COVID. It was basically still almost about to be the lockdown, or actually was in the middle of the lockdown. So searching to see what stores are open before you go to a job site is not bizarre. You'll also hear that during COVID, items such as Clorox wipes and gloves were extremely hard to come by, and you would pick them up when you got the opportunity. So the timeline that the state told you, there's evidence that supplements that shows Mr. Anderson could not have had the opportunity to commit the charged offense. The other piece of evidence that the state talked about was Marquand Washington. And that Mr. Anderson allegedly admitted to him that he did this and that he stabbed Mr. Gutierrez, took his body, put it in some trash bags, and took the trash out and got rid of him forever. The state talked to you a little bit about Marquand Washington. Marquand Washington is currently facing a minimum of 10 years to life, and it's a federal case. And you'll hear during this trial that in federal cases, when there are mandatory minimums, the only way to deviate from that mandatory minimum, so the only way to get less than 10 years is if you cooperate. If you provide information and then get on the stand and testify to that and cooperate, that the government, who's the prosecutor in a federal case, can file a document to say, Judge, we're asking for lesser than that 10-year mandatory minimum. And you'll see that in Mr. Washington's plea paperwork, the government nicely outlines that in order for you to get less time, this is what you're going to have to do. Now, the state didn't mention this to you, but Mr. Washington is someone who will literally do anything to get out of his situation. That they had evidence, that the federal government had evidence that he intimidated the witnesses and victims in his own case in an attempt to get out of his situation. And when that didn't work, he was left with one option: cooperation.
Yep.
And in February of 2022, the federal government was told that he had information that he wanted to share. And they wrote a letter to him. And they said, Mr. Washington, we've heard that you want to share some information about some crimes that you have knowledge about in the Milwaukee surrounding area. Please let us know what that is. He did not mention Mr. Anderson in February of 2022, and that's critical because the state said that Mr. Anderson trusts Marquand Washington, but Marquand Washington only was housed with Mr. Anderson for approximately 3 weeks. It was a very short housing situation, and those 3 weeks was from December of 20.
Do you open up to somebody? I mean, granted, they're in close quarters and, talking kind of would probably help pass the time, but would you just tell everybody your deepest, darkest secrets in prison to some stranger that you've only known 3 weeks or less than because they just started bunking,
February of 2022. Or no, sorry, I apologize. It was December of 2021 to January 31st of 2022. So in February of 22, he would have had this information, but he didn't share it then. No, he only shared it about 3 in a case that's been going on since May of 2020, when he's allegedly had this information for almost 2 years. But what's even more critical is Marquand Washington, as the state says he will testify, and I'm saying as the state will say he will testify because the defense did not have the opportunity to meet with Mr. Washington. Mr. Gravely, the district attorney, and Vincent Carrera, a detective, they met with Marquand Washington, and they questioned him for an hour and 30 minutes approximately. They did not record the interview. Instead, they gave the defense a 2.5-page summary of what he would say.
Yikes.
But what I do know from that 2.5-page summary is that he claims that Mr. Anderson said he stabbed the guy. The state talked about how you'll hear from officers about the blood stain pattern analysis completed in this case. That officer will tell you that he believed that the stain patterns that were seen in Mr. Gutierrez's apartment were consistent with blunt force trauma. That was his opinion just in February of last year, Officer Van Wee, and in his reports from closer to May 2020, he wrote that he believed it was blunt force trauma, so a heavy object or an object hitting someone. And also Detective Carrera wrote in his reports that it was blunt force trauma. There was never a single mention in Van Wee's reports or Detective Carrera's reports that the stain pattern analysis were consistent with sharp force injuries. There's a difference between blunt force injuries and sharp force injuries. Sharp force injuries is a knife. No mention of that. In fact, you'll hear that Mr. Gutierrez was an avid baseball fan, loved baseball. Not only did he love baseball, but he loved to play baseball with his kids. And he was a coach for minor leagues. And so he had baseballs in his apartment and in his truck. He had gloves in his apartment and in his truck. You know what wasn't recovered in the crime scene or in a truck? Not a single baseball bat.
The baseball bat, I've been saying, has not been found. So the baseball bat that we know, well, according to his text to Sadie, that was on the 16th of May, so the day before he went missing, he was out shopping for baseball and other sporting good supplies, whatever, for his son for the baseball, softball team, whatever. But we know that he bought a baseball bat. Sorry, can't talk today. He bought a baseball bat, and that bat was never recovered in his apartment. So it's very likely that it could have been the weapon. But we also know that he might have been there might have been a sneak attack from the front, or from his door. Like somebody knocked and then they snuck up and attacked him, but then grabbed the bat inside. I don't know. I do not know. That's potentially how it looks. But they could have come in also through the window, I mean, the window was open, so.
Not a single one. But the state told you that they had a shard of, the state said it themselves, what could have come off of a baseball bat with blood on it. So
the little piece of wood, the splintered off wood, could have come from a wooden baseball bat.
the evidence will contradict itself. It can't be the stabbing and it can't be the baseball bat. The next item that the state talked about was the DNA in the van, and the state claims that there will be a witness that will get up here and tell you that that was blood in that van. And I'm not sure where that's coming from. Because Lisa Treffinger, who's an analyst at the state crime lab, was the individual in charge of processing the van and that particular dot. And it was so small, like freckle size. She's the individual responsible. And you'll hear from her and other state crime lab analysts that they processed that van extremely thoroughly. You'll see pictures of the van too. Not a van that's been cleaned. There's dirt everywhere, dust on the dashboard, no indication that it's been cleaned, no blood in the front driver's seat. In fact, no blood anywhere. They saw red dots, tested it for blood. They did a test that's specific to determine if a item that purports to look like blood is blood. Negative. They did luminol testing. I don't know if any of you are aware of that, but what they do is they spray the substance and it will basically light up if there's the presence of blood. Didn't light up. They said that there was this one flicker of light, so they tested that area. Negative for blood. This dot that the state claims someone's going to tell you was blood, in an email from Lisa Treffinger, the analyst that will testify, you'll hear her tell you that the state asked her, an email from the state, I just wanted to confirm that the sample that was sourced to Rosalio from the van was blood, right? This was analyst Treffinger's response, and she'll testify to this. We could not confirm it was blood. Her own words, not mine.
Her report and her tests don't match up, like what she says in testimony and her report regarding the specs of what she thought turned out not to be BLOOD.
DNA in his van, though. How do you explain that? The state claims that the explanation of how Mr. Gutierrez's blood got in the van was because Mr. Anderson must have killed him. But the evidence will tell you that there's a far more logical explanation for how that occurred. The state talked to you about the evidence that might come in about an incident that happened on April 24th, 2020, where Mr. Anderson had gone into Mr. Gutierrez's vehicle, had taken something out. This was talked about between Ms. Beecham and Mr. Gutierrez at length. Ms. Beecham told Mr. Gutierrez on April 25th about what had happened, how Mr. Anderson had gone in his car. And they talked about how maybe something should be done about that. There was conversations between them about how maybe Mr. Anderson should get a taste of his...
Yeah, Sadie was like, yeah, you F with me, you're going to get F'd with back, or something along those lines.
...his own medicine. Later that night, at 11:10 p.m. on April 25th, 2020, Ms. Beecham received a text from Mr. Gutierrez that said, "What's his fucking address?" Sadie responded, "Well, I guess if he has your info, you should have his." Mm-hmm. And then Mr. Gutierrez sends her a text with Mr. Anderson's address. This is on the 25th. And then on the 26th, he sends her a text that says, "For the record, only if you say it's okay." He also sent, and then Ms. Beecham sends him a text, "He's gonna find out." This all happens on the 26th of April. Mr. Gutierrez is apprised of the fact that Mr. Anderson went into his vehicle. Sadie and Mr. Gutierrez talk about how something should be done similar to Mr. Anderson. And then, on April 26th, 2020, Mr. Gutierrez's Cellbrite location data puts him at 6813 Highland Road, Mequon, Wisconsin. He's there.
Zach's
Mr.
place.
Gutierrez, after talking about how something similar should be done to Mr. Anderson, that something similar being going into a vehicle, is at Mr. Anderson's house. His location puts him there. And then right after he's there, he has a video FaceTime with Miss Beecham for 2.5 hours. And that conversation occurs at 3:11 a.m. in the morning.
About what? What were you plotting?
In addition to the fact that there's more reasonable explanations, as you'll see through the evidence, that is ignored by the prosecution. The fact that the timeline illustrates Mr. Anderson could not have done this. The fact that no one puts him there on May 17th, 2020. The fact that there is no blood in the van, there's no body, there are no remains, there's no murder weapon. They still are going with the fact that Mr. Anderson committed this crime. That's because, remember, that's who they chose as their main character. They ignored,
The only
by they, I mean
character.
law enforcement ignored legitimate leads and follow-ups, suspicious people. And they ignored that because on May 19th, 2020, when law enforcement met with Sadie outside of Mr. Gutierrez's apartment, she said, my ex had something to do with it. And they said, great, let's
Yep.
run with it. We're going to try to build a case around him, even if we don't have a body. We have no explanation of what happened to him. We have no explanation of where Mr. Anderson would have put a body. We're
Where's
gonna
the
run with it.
investigation
So what did they
part?
ignore? They ignored Miss Beecham. Miss Beecham, as the state noted, went to Mr. Gutierrez's residence at around 11 a.m. on Monday, May 19th, 2020. She had only been dating this guy for a couple months. This guy was dating
3.
other people. They only saw each other every other weekend, some weekends. It wasn't a hot and heavy relationship like the state wants it to purport. The evidence isn't going to show that. So she's only been dating this guy for a couple months, a guy she met off of Facebook dating, and decides, you know what, haven't heard from him. I'm going to go to his house in the middle of the day when he would be working to see what's up.
Yeah. Why wouldn't she think he was ghosting her? Because that's what I would have thought. Like, oh, this guy's just not answering me. F him. That would have been my thought. So how she got so like, oh, I just know something's wrong immediately. It was weird. That is suspicious to me. That she was already suspecting something bad happening.
Sure, there could be innocent explanations to that, but you'll also hear evidence that Miss Beecham had constantly been texting with her best friend, Rebecca Jekyll, about how she thinks Zach's tracking her but can't prove anything. She says that. She says that to Rebecca Jekyll, and she's complaining about it. And this is all on 5/14/2020. She's complaining about it, text messages between her and her best friend, Rebecca Jekyll. And on May 14th, 2020, Rebecca Jekyll randomly texts Sadie Beecham and says, in this discussion string where they're discussing how she, is so irritated with Mr. Anderson, Miss Jackal sends a random out-of-place text that says, phone call has been placed. All I was told is it will begin and you will not know when, where, or how. Call me in 1 week. And what's 1 week later?
What the heck does that mean? It's very cryptic. You don't just send that out of nowhere.
When she's at Mr. Gutierrez's apartment. So, if we could have the objection heard outside the presence of the jury.
Go ahead, Ms. Gridley.
Yeah, what?
What did you say?
I do want to do it outside the presence of the jury. I apologize. This thread is something that we've litigated prior.
Generally, folks,
Apologize.
quiet, please. I'm going to ask you to step just into the library if somebody needs to.
He does this the whole trial. He sends the poor jury in and out of the room, in and out of the room. But it's important for them not to hear legal arguments because they might infer things from that. But anyways, we're not going to listen to all of it.
You're welcome to do so, but come right back down.
We'll listen to
Go
some.
into the library, and
I don't think it can be cured at this point, and so I asked the court to consider what our remedies are, but I believe that this is a clear Denny violation and that this is a mistrial.
If I may be heard, Judge. Thank you. In my opening statement before I started going into this sequence, I talked about how law enforcement did not follow up or look into anything as far as possible other suspects or leads. I'm not offering this, and first of all, I'm just talking about the evidence that's going to come in, right? At this point, this is what the opening statement's for. This is a message string between Miss Beecham and another witness. This will come in, and it's not to offer it, Judge. It's not to offer it to say it was her. It's to offer it to show that law enforcement did not investigate her, did not investigate anyone else. That's not a Denny motion. I'm not pointing the finger. I'm not saying Miss Beecham did it. I'm saying they could have followed up on this, they should have followed up on this, and they didn't. It's very different.
first of all, you're telling me
Pointing out flaws in the investigation, and where the investigators may have missed something is totally acceptable. So it's not a Denny, because she's not trying to pin it on Sadie. She's just trying to point out that investigators didn't do their job. But we fight about this for hours, the rest of the day, basically. We're not going to watch all of it. Maybe a little bit more, because it is kind of fun to watch. But we're not going to watch all of it. And then we'll skip to the next day when a decision is made, and then the rest of the day, there's nothing that happens. And then we finally get her to finish. So it's like long and drawn out before she ever gets to finish her poor opening statement, this poor girl.
It's not coming in. And if it's not coming in, then you're not supposed to talk about it.
No, I said it is coming in, that this will come in through witnesses.
Say it wasn't going to come in.
No, sorry.
I heard you wrong.
Okay.
Did you want to respond, Mr. Waverly?
Yeah, you can talk about whatever purpose you want. The argument made to the jury is other people should have been looked at. I mean, you couldn't be more clear in your argument. The argument was other people did this crime. My client did not. Other people did. Here's example one. And she's now laid out specific electronic evidence that she wants the jury to be presented. So not only is she making an accusation, the substance of this accusation is that Sadie Beecham and a friend of hers have conspired to find a third party who will kill this person. That's the allegation that's been just made. And she's indicating that's what the text would lead a reasonable person to believe. There's been no notice of that specific allegation. The jury has now heard it. It's been shared with the jury. There's a whole body of case law in Wisconsin that does not allow a private citizen to be accused. And for a person to say, well, that's not for the purpose of accusing another human being of murder, that's what she's done. That's the argument that's been made. It doesn't matter if that's not the sole purpose you have. Your objective here is to tell the jury, hey, there's reasonable doubt. Sadie Beecham did this. Look at this electronic message. That's why you argue that. There's no other reasonable argument as to why this has been shared with the jury. And why weren't we given notice of this? Why wasn't, when a Denny motion was filed with all the details, and I lauded I complimented the defense just a week ago when they provided their factual circumstances so the court could litigate that with the state. Because
I applauded them just a week ago, but now, no.
that's the entire proper procedure. I'm on record as having
He's
complimented them for supplementing and providing a factual basis for the court to make a fair ruling. And we are in complete absence of that in this situation. This can't be remedied. Sadie Beecham has been accused of murder when Denny exists as
no, she wasn't.
In this state.
If I may respond.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Judge. I have not accused anyone of anything. I think it's been very clear that the defense is saying that none of this evidence exists, and law enforcement...
This argument is outside the presence of the jury, FYI. So they're arguing this without the jury. And the jury basically goes home, and they continue to argue the rest of the day.
And instead of doing their jobs to investigate, just went with a single individual, that they had tunnel vision. An extremely proper defense, and this does not fall under Denny, is to say what the law enforcement didn't do. I'm not here to purport that this is what happened, nor have I said that. During trial, it'll be, this message was sent. Hey, detective, were you aware of this? Did you look into it? Do you think it's a little bizarre? Yeah. And leave it at that. Nowhere have I just said right now that I intend on pinning this all on Miss Beecham, nor have I think that has been the theme of my opening statement.
But if you don't have greater information than that, and why is it relevant? I mean, what difference would it make whether the police followed through on it or not, unless there's reason to believe that that was the person who was responsible for the disappearance of the decedent? It's irrelevant. And
I don't think so.
I'm hoping they didn't investigate me too, or Mr. Gravely, or Ms. Griseric. They'd have to have a reason to do that. And if there isn't abundant reason to suspect that Ms. Beecham was involved, then I think Mr. Gravely is quite right. This is just a camouflaged Denny effort.
The defense would respectfully disagree with that, Your Honor. By sustaining the state's objection, the court would ultimately be holding that the defense cannot go into how law enforcement didn't do their job, which in a case where there's no body, no evidence of human remains.
Why did you file a motion?
It's not a Denny motion. I'm not offering this to point the finger at someone to say, this person did the crime.
You have an alternative actor theory.
It's not an alternative actor theory, and if I could maybe give a preview to what was going to come next, is the 20 other things that law enforcement didn't follow up on. It's more targeted, if I may finish, it's more targeted to what law enforcement did or did not do, opposed to what some third party did or did not do. That is what this is going towards, and the defense would maintain that that is extremely relevant. It does not fall under the curtails of Denny, and that we are permitted to go into that in opening argument and during the pendency of this trial.
Okay, I want to be heard on the precise thing that was said by the defense, because this is a disingenuous argument to say, my argument is just, a police officer, here's the text message, isn't this weird? That's what she just told you. Here's what she represented to the jury. She said that, she read the text message and said that this mysterious third party will take care of this, but you won't know the details, and we'll know in a week, right? And then she said
But that's what the text said. So she's not making shit up.
commented to the jury, and a week is when Sadie Beecham goes and discovers this bloody
And it's true.
scene. So she ties it in. She says, guess what, jury? At the end of the week, it's Sadie Beecham who, in response to this message, has now made this discovery.
That's not what she said at all.
This is implicating Sadie Beecham directly in a homicide. That's the only reason you make that argument. She didn't remark, and I didn't object when she first began to speak. What she told the jury was that this is bolstered by Sadie Beecham being the person who discovers this scene a week later, which is in accordance with the detail with the text. This should not be investigated by the state on the fly. This is just not, Denny does not allow a scenario where a fellow human being can be accused of a homicide and the state is expected to figure out on the fly what this information leads to. The jury has every reasonable expectation right now that Sadie Beecham could be the killer, based on what's been said. That should never, ever be said in a courtroom until Denny is litigated, ever. I mean, this is a line that, it's not even a close line that's being crossed here, and we remedy for this jury.
What I was going to say before the objection came was that
Well-
even just, okay, so it's still, again, not being offered to point the finger at her. And I'm not
Frankly, your Denny motion that I denied with respect to Mr.
Campbell.
I might have granted the one on this one because there is not more body to it. So I think Mr. Gravely correctly is concerned that this is just, as I said, a camouflaged Denny motion or effort.
I disagree. The defense disagrees. This is law enforcement. So we can't go into how law enforcement investigated this crime then. Would ultimately be the court's holding. Because there's
That's not the court's holding.
So why didn't you investigate the person who just happened to find all of this? So is
Well,
that
first off,
pointing the finger?
That's not the issue before me. This isn't midway through the trial that you didn't ask some probing questions of the detective if he testifies. And ask, well, did you look at this? Did you look at that? To try to show a sloppy investigation, if you think it was. This is in your opening statement and planting a seed. And it's all right to plant seeds. That's why we have opening statements.
And the
But
prosecution doesn't do that?
this particular one has a special body of law handed down to us from the Supreme Court of the United States. And as I say, you correctly brought the Denny motion on Mr. Campbell's issue, but I think this is, it's in the same category.
If I can further be heard.
Yeah.
So what is the difference then between saying law enforcement, because I do anticipate talking to Carrera and other detectives about these messages, about whether they looked into any other possible individuals, which is not a Denny motion. And so what's the difference between me saying to a jury in an opening statement, which is what I believe the evidence that's going to come in is going to come in, that this message is going to come in and law enforcement did not follow up on that?
I'm not going to pre-screen what you might or might not ask.
But I'm saying...
You're capable of making your own decision about whether you want to ask the question and what the risk would be. But this is a concrete issue that is before me now, and I think is correctly analyzed by the state, and what I'm struggling with is what to do about it.
Well, Judge, frankly, a Denny requires notice. So this jury is tainted. We need the court to provide us an opportunity for, if this is an argument they wish to make with an individual identified, they need to notice us, provide us what the factual basis is they're going to allege, and allow us to counter that. This is what happened with the Campbell situation, right? We had the police look at their information, do an investigation that would allow the court to be provided both sides of what that information would entail, and then the court is able to make an educated gatekeeper determination. That wasn't done here. Counsel would be prohibited from arguing an opening or closing without Denny guidance, without the court gatekeeping under Denny, any of this information. So under whatever shield they want to use, whatever they want to label it, it still can't be argued in opening or closing as something that is alleged in this case unless the court gives them permission. This is a mistrial. You cannot take away a suspect from a jury. You can't do it.
Big surprise. He wants a mistrial again. All right, so we're going to skip through. I'm going to just skip us to... This is the most replayed, but I don't think it's... We get to hear from Mr. Aubert. I'm going to listen to him for just a little bit.
There will be further argument from the defense. Attorney Aubert will be handling that.
Okay, you have the floor.
This is Aubert,
Turn on here. Okay.
and this is Mr. Birdsall.
We did some more research over the lunch hour, and I wanted to point a couple of things out. First of all, in the context of the particulars of this case, it's very obvious that the defense is that Mr. Anderson did not commit the offense. So this is not one of those defenses where we're attacking an intent element or the manner in which something was performed. Our theory, of course, as the court is well aware, is that he didn't commit this alleged crime. The comments that were being made by Attorney Mueller during her opening statement were part of a larger argument and in proximity to the point that she had just previously made, which is that that the investigation focused solely on Mr. Anderson. And in fact, the words that she made in terms of what our whole theme and theory of this case is that there was a script that was written, Mr. Anderson was the central player, the main starring role in this script. Now, as in any case where there is an investigation, and if it's the defense's intent to argue that the defendant did not commit this offense, it's part of virtually every case where reasonable doubt is what we're addressing. Am I not being loud enough? Reasonable doubt? I'll try to talk more directly into it. The angle's funny here. So it's really a matter of looking at what the entire investigation entailed. Everything that Attorney Mueller was discussing in her opening statement was based on information that had been provided by the state. Now, there are a number of different...
All right, I'm going to skip to the next day.
So counsel will correct me if I make any representations she did not feel are completely accurate, but I believe that I believe that based on the filing submitted by the defense, that the state and the defense have an understanding that the defense will not make any arguments that rise to the level of a Denny argument and not present any evidence that will rise to the level of a Denny argument. And they recognize that.
So this is what they agreed upon. After discussing it, the judge kind of made them decide, or made them take the night to discuss it with one another and figure something out and then come back the next day. So this is their resolution.
The argument that the state believed was a Denny argument was a sort of a connect the dots argument of some individual pieces of evidence, and they've indicated they will not make that sort of connect the dot argument that would rise to the level of Denny, and their submission reflects that. They have indicated to the court they have no additional Denny hearings that they are seeking from the court, even though the court gave them guidance if there was Denny-like evidence that they should put it in their submission. In light of that and understanding that I believe that to be an accurate interpretation of what they wish their filing to represent to the court, the parties were able to come up with a joint proposed cautionary instruction so that we did not have to have a mistrial in light of that pleading. That joint proposed cautionary instruction has been submitted to the court. All parties have copies. Does the court need me to read it, or does it stand in this record because it is a filed document?
I'll leave it to your choice or that of the other party. It doesn't need to be, but you're welcome to do so.
Well, I have no reason to. Do you, counsel? Okay, so we've come up with a joint proposed cautionary instruction. We're asking the court that be read.
Meaning this is what the court's going to read to the jury tomorrow when the jury's out this day. They weren't planned to be in this particular day. So the following day when they do come back, this instruction is going to be read by the judge to them.
At the conclusion of the defense's opening statement, that was the express preference by the defense counsel, which the state is fine with, so that it is
at the
in close
conclusion
proximity
of
to
the
the end
statement.
of the defense opening statement. The court certainly will use its own discretion about whether it should be read at any other time, but that is the time that we are asking the court specifically to read it. The state is also requesting to the court that in light of the sort of connect the dots argument made by the defense, that the state be able to add to its witness list and to call in its case in chief a witness named Rebecca Jekyll, that's Jaeckel. We intend to present some evidence to refute the implications that were raised in the defense opening argument. And I don't believe the defense has any issue with that. I believe that's the entirety of our discussions. Is that, counsel, is that? Yeah. So I believe that is the entirety of our joint discussions.
All right. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, hold on one second.
Yeah.
I had told him that I could see how he would interpret it that way and how someone could interpret it that way, but that I'd hope he could see that we could also interpret it, the defense could interpret it in the way that we so proposed on Tuesday and also in our pleading to the court. And so there was kind of that mutual understanding that it could be seen both ways is kind of my understanding of that conversation. And so that was why we found it amenable to prepare this proposed cautionary instruction, and that would really cure any concerns that the state would have as it related to the statements that were made during the opening. As far as when we are requesting it to be read, the state's assertion was correct that we're asking that it be read at the conclusion of the defense's opening statement. And then with Ms. Rebecca Jekyll being added to the state's witness list, naturally no objection. She was on ours. I did confirm with the state that they will write up a summary of what was discussed with her about this text message that will be prepared and provided to the defense prior to her testifying. So we will have that information and can act accordingly when we receive it. So that's the only supplement that I have, Judge. But I think that what the state and myself have come to an agreement on is appropriate, and that the court should accept it and should allow this trial to continue.
So there's withdrawal of the motion of the state for mistrial?
Frankly, what we've tried to figure out is a way to move on at this point. So yeah, I'm withdrawing the motion for mistrial in light of the stipulations and the filing so that we can...
So there you are. They're not having a mistrial. Let's go on to the next day. Let me grab the link for this one. So we're going to finish Nicole's opening statement. I don't think she has too much more. And then that'll be it for this episode. Let's see here.
Welcome back, and we had some discussion, and the attorneys consulted, and
The jury's back.
it's decided that the objection which was raised by Mr. Gravely has been withdrawn. So we'll continue where we were. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. So where I had left off when I last was speaking with you all was about how law enforcement in this case failed to actually investigate the events the state asserts transpired on May 17th, 2020. How they ignored leads, how they didn't follow up on things, how they failed to look in places that should have been looked into. So I'm going to go into some of those investigative failures now. You'll hear that law enforcement really did no searches of Mr. Gutierrez around the immediate vicinity of Wood Creek Apartments, where Mr. Gutierrez lived. That there's a wooded park area that is property of UW Parkside, and that all that they did with that area was send some drones to look around. But you'll hear that it was forested at that point, because we're in the middle of May,
Down,
and that
guys.
they would not have been able to see the floor of that entire wooded area. So law enforcement looked nowhere close to Mr. Gutierrez's residence in an attempt to find potential evidence. Not only did they fail to do that, they failed to investigate legitimate Crime Stopper leads. So people could call in with tips, anonymous or not, and there was this one tip where an individual called in and said, I saw a woman standing in front of Mr. Gutierrez's sliding door on that concrete slabbed patio on May 18th, 2020. And I remember this because she had asked me what time it was, and I knew it was Mr. Gutierrez's apartment because his sliding door is right next to that exit door. Law enforcement got that information and ignored it. They did not follow up. They also didn't follow up on data that they obtained through a geofence warrant. And you'll hear that a geofence warrant is where law enforcement takes a certain area and asks Google to produce all the information and data on people that they know were in that location on a specific date and during specific time frames. And in this case, Detective Carrera had asked for the geofence data on all individuals who were around Mr. Gutierrez's apartment from May 17th, 2020 at 7 p.m. through May 18th, 2020 at 3 a.m. And that Google produced several hits for people that were in that area. And you'll hear that law enforcement did not attempt to investigate any of those potential people who were in the area at the time the state asserts the crime occurred. You'll also hear that Mr. Anderson did not appear in that data. When law enforcement arrived on scene on May 19th, 2020, there were two dumpsters next to Mr. Gutierrez's apartment, and they had gone and looked at them and noticed that there really was not that much trash. Maybe a bag, a box, and so they called the waste management company, and they asked, hey, when was this trash picked up? And the waste management individuals had informed them that the trash had been picked up earlier that morning on the 19th, and that it was sent to Zion Landfill in Illinois. You'll hear that law enforcement chose not to go to Zion Landfill and search what would have been freshly dumped garbage that could have produced evidence in this crime. And you'll hear that that could have been because Mr. Anderson, the person, remember, that they had chose as their main character, there was no indication that he had ever gone out to Zion or that he had spent any significant time in the Kenosha area. It didn't fit their script. They weren't going to investigate it. They also didn't investigate Pheasant Run landfill. That was a landfill that they had potential information that Mr. Gutierrez's body had been dumped there. They didn't go to Pheasant Run landfill. They didn't talk to anyone in management at Pheasant Run landfill to see whether there was any individual who dumped off trash that Monday, May 18th, that morning. They did not investigate that lead. They also didn't investigate people that Mr. Gutierrez owed money to. And you'll hear throughout this case that Mr. Gutierrez was in an extremely difficult financial situation. His mom was helping paying bills. He was about to be evicted from his apartment. And he had people messaging him about where their money is and how you don't do this to friends. And you'll hear that law enforcement did not investigate a single person that he seemed to owe a substantial amount of money to. And then they also didn't look into all of the women that Mr. Gutierrez would have been talking to or dating at that time. You'll hear that Mr. Gutierrez had several dating apps. They were located on his phone. He had emails from dating websites, and that law enforcement didn't look into any of the chat strings on there.
I mean, why
And that's
wouldn't
just the tip of the
you?
iceberg. What I just outlined for you is
Sorry. I mean, why wouldn't you investigate all the people that he was dating? No one in his life. They didn't investigate anyone in Rosalio's life. They didn't investigate Rosalio's life at all to find out if there was anybody else that might want him hurt or gone out of the picture. Maybe he was dating so many people. Maybe he was dating somebody's wife. Who knows? I don't know. I'm just making stuff up. But you should have been investigating that, not getting blindsided on Zach. Anyways.
just a little sprinkle of an example of everything that law enforcement failed to investigate. But not only did they fail to investigate legitimate leads and potential other suspects, they also failed to effectively process the scene of the crime. They failed to obtain DNA swabs, fingerprints from areas that, according to their theory, the individual or individuals who was responsible for the disappearance of Mr. Gutierrez would have had to have touched or come in contact with. The first thing law enforcement did when they arrived on scene on May 19th, 2020, was they took a video of them walking into the apartment, of Mr. Gutierrez's apartment, and all of the lights were off. So the state claims that there was this blunt force trauma, this beating, someone was wrapped up in a rug, the crime scene was meticulously cleaned up so that no trace of the other people who were there could be found, that then the scene is staged to the point that it looks like a robbery could have occurred. That obviously didn't happen all in the dark if they're claiming that this happened around 10 p.m. at night, yet law enforcement did not swab the light switches in the apartment for potential DNA, nor did they attempt to get any fingerprints. In addition to their failure to obtain swabs from areas that could have contained DNA of the people who are actually responsible for Mr. Gutierrez's disappearance, their lack of precision shows immensely in the fact that 9 days after they initially made contact with Mr. Gutierrez's apartment, Mr. Gutierrez's mother, Ms. Patterson, found Mr. Gutierrez's cell phone in the freezer. That law enforcement's there for 8 days. They'll claim that they searched, they processed, they were very thorough, yet they didn't find Mr. Gutierrez's cell phone that was right there in the freezer or the contents of his wallet that were in the freezer. So they did swab the cell phone for DNA, but what they didn't swab or process for fingerprints were the cards that were found, which, according to the state's theory, the person who's involved in Mr. Gutierrez's disappearance would have had to touch, to take out of the wallet, to put in the freezer. And they also didn't process the handle of the freezer. It's also critical that there was no blood on the handle of the freezer. And the phone, interesting enough, the DNA, they send the swab that they took to the crime lab, and it comes back and they say, yep, it's Mr. Gutierrez's DNA on the phone, but there was something that's called a trace allele.
I was muted. I said, I think she's doing a good job of pointing out a lot of things, a lot of the flaws that were, that she found in the investigation. I think she's doing a good job pointing them out.
And you'll hear from the DNA expert that a trace allele means that it's someone else's DNA, that it's a portion of someone's DNA that did not belong to Mr. Gutierrez, but someone else. And you'll hear that that trace DNA that they found on that cell phone, as I just said, did not belong to Mr. Gutierrez, it did not belong to Ms. Patterson, the individual who found the cell phone, and it did not belong to my client, Mr. Zachariah Anderson. So someone else's DNA is on that phone.
How about that?
You'll also see pictures and hear testimony about how the furniture in Mr. Gutierrez's apartment had been moved. And all of this furniture had been meticulously moved. Nothing's knocked over, nothing's broken. The kitchen table's nicely pushed back. The two white tables that were in front of the couch were nicely moved to the side. The couch had been moved, and we can see that because there's indentations in the carpet of where the couch had stayed for a long time versus where it was now. There were no bloody fingerprints or hand marks on the bottom of the couch. They didn't process that for DNA in that area of a couch where the person had allegedly moved it, would have had to have touched. They didn't process the areas of the chairs that would have needed to have been moved, the table that would have needed to have been moved by the person who's allegedly responsible for the disappearance of Mr.
Look at
Gutierrez.
that smirk on her face.
They also didn't process the tools that appeared to be nicely laid out in front of the screen door. Nor did they process in Mr. Gutierrez's bedroom the open window. They didn't process that for fingerprints. What did they do? They processed the blood. That was it. Law enforcement's failure to investigate leads and to effectively process a crime scene is critical in this case.
Yep.
There's no body, no human remains, no murder weapon, no witnesses that can tell you exactly what happened. Yet they wanted to go with the narrative that it must have been Mr. Anderson, and that was someone that they looked into everything possible. They ignored everything else. They ignored the idea that it could be anyone else other than Mr. Anderson. And you'll hear that they meticulously searched Mr. Anderson's property, not just his house, his whole property. No body, no human remains, no evidence that there had been a huge cleanup at a crime scene, no murder weapon. Not only did they search his house, they also searched his family's tree farm, an 80-acre farm. Top to bottom, multiple law enforcement agencies, every acre, no body, no human remains,
No body.
no murder weapon, no evidence of a crime scene cleanup. They also searched Miss Susan Brown Williamson's home, and that was the place that Mr. Anderson had gone in the morning to work that the state claims is where Mr. Anderson, I guess, chopped up a body and put it in bags. They searched that property meticulously, not only the house, but the entire grounds. No body, no human remains, no murder weapon, nothing of evidentiary value. They then searched all of the bodies of water.
We don't even have a theory as to where the body could be anymore because the law enforcement spent so much time and effort and money trying to find him in these places where they thought Zach may have hit him, but because they never looked at anybody else, who knows where Rosalio could be. The landfills and the other in Zion, Illinois, or in Pheasant Run.
Water that were near that home and Mr. Anderson's home, not Lake Michigan, but quarries and little lakes. And they had technology that could go all the way down to the bottom to see if there was anything there. That search also revealed nothing. So the person they chose as their main character, the only person they investigated in this case, they did all of that and it yielded nothing. Mr. Anderson, as he sits in front of you today, is presumed innocent. And he must stay that way. Because the evidence in this case, as it will come in through this trial, will not establish that Mr. Anderson committed the alleged crimes beyond a reasonable doubt. And for that reason, when the defense comes and speaks to you, when the evidence is done, we will ask that you return the only just verdict, and that's a verdict of not guilty. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to stop it here. So we heard opening statements from both sides now. Even though it took them over multiple days to get it done, they finally got it done. Would you relax, dogs? Ugh, they've been driving me nuts. They can't sit for 2 hours straight. All right, so I'm going to leave it there. And so next episode, we're going to start looking at testimony from key witnesses and looking at how credible they are and if we think they're credible or not. So we will see you in the next episode. Thank you so much for being here. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And I hope to see you next time. Take care.